My name is Audrey Appleton. I was 32 years old the day my father slid a tarnished brass key across the dinner table and handed me what he thought was the family's consolation prize. My older brother Derek got the Manhattan penthouse. I got the broken farmhouse in Vermont. At least, that's how everyone at the table saw it. The dinner took place in my father's Connecticut house, the same colonial my mother had decorated before she died, though almost none of her touches remained anymore. Patricia, my stepmother, had erased them one by one over the years. New curtains, new furniture, new photographs on the walls, even the dining chairs had changed. Only the table remained. Dad stood at the head of it like a CEO delivering quarterly bonuses. "Derek," he announced proudly, "the apartment on East 73rd is yours." Derek smirked before Dad even finished speaking. His girlfriend Chloe practically squealed. Patricia reached over and squeezed my father's arm with the satisfied smile of a woman watching a long-term investment mature. Then Dad looked at me. "Audrey," he said, pausing long enough for the room to feel awkward, "you get the Vermont property. No address, no valuation, no enthusiasm, just the Vermont property." Then he dropped the brass key into my palm. Derek laughed immediately. "Wait," he said, leaning back in his chair, "the chicken coop." Patricia dabbed her lips delicately with her napkin. "It's very rustic," she added. Rustic, that was a polite word for collapsing. Dad gave me the look he always gave me when he expected gratitude for minimal effort. "Your brother needs more support," he explained. I curled my fingers around the key. It was warm from his pocket. "Thank you," I said quietly. And I meant it, just not for the reason any of them imagined. I drove to Vermont the next weekend, 4 hours north from Boston. November sky, cold air sharp enough to sting my lungs. The property sat at the end of a dirt road beyond the last mailbox in town. 5 acres bordered by maple trees and a creek that ran silver through the meadow. And in the center of it all stood the house. Crooked porch, sagging roof, cracked foundation stones. The windows looked blind with dust. When I pushed open the front door, it groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside smelled like mildew, frozen pipes, and abandonment. But beneath all of that I saw structure. Original oak beams, hand-cut stone fireplace, 19th century craftsmanship buried under decades of neglect. The bones were magnificent. I walked room to room slowly, my boots crunching broken plaster. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Possibility. That night Derek posted in the family group chat. "Audrey's gonna renovate her chicken coop," face with tears of joy. Patricia reacted with a laughing emoji. Dad said nothing. I screenshotted it. Not because it hurt, because I wanted to remember. People reveal themselves most honestly when they think they're above you. I'm an architect, historic restoration specialist. I've spent 10 years bringing forgotten structures back to life. Old mills, Victorian homes, abandoned train depots. I knew exactly what that farmhouse could become. The others only saw rot. I saw value hidden under neglect. Maybe because I understood the feeling personally. My mother died when I was 12, breast cancer. 2 years of hospitals and medications and whispered conversations in hallways adults thought I couldn't hear. Derek was 15 then, old enough to become Dad's emotional partner in grief. Football games, road trips, father-son bonding. I became invisible, the quiet daughter, the independent one. Patricia loved using that word. "Oh, Audrey doesn't need much attention," she would say warmly to relatives. "She's so independent." What she really meant was, "She can survive without investment," and she was right. I learned to survive without investment. Straight A's, scholarships, architecture school, long nights drafting blueprints while Derek failed upward through expensive hobbies funded by Dad's guilt. I stopped expecting fairness early. Life got easier after that. There was only one thing from my mother I never stopped thinking about. A sentence she whispered beside her hospital bed shortly before she died. "I left you something, Audrey," she said softly. "When the time is right, you'll find it." At 12 years old, I thought she meant jewelry, or money, or a letter. I had no idea she meant a house. Back in Boston, I started researching immediately. Zoning regulations, historic restoration grants, tourism studies, commercial lodging permits. I built spreadsheets until 2 in the morning, cost projections, structural assessments. Revenue models. I became obsessed, not emotionally, professionally. That's the thing people misunderstand about underestimated women. Eventually, emotion turns into strategy. Then I made a phone call. Margaret Chen answered on the 3rd ring. She had been my mother's best friend in college and later became her attorney. I hadn't spoken to her in years. "Margaret," I said carefully, "my father gave me a property in Vermont." Silence. Then, "What property?" I gave her the address. Another silence, longer this time. Finally she exhaled slowly. "Audrey," she said, "I think you should come see me." Her voice had changed, lower, heavier, like she had been carrying something for a very long time. Is this about my mother? I asked. Yes, that single word changed everything. Meanwhile, Derek was thriving in the way only reckless people can appear to thrive. The Manhattan penthouse became his entire personality. Instagram stories, champagne bottles, terrace selfies overlooking Central Park. He quit his sales job 2 weeks after inheriting the apartment, called himself an entrepreneur. What that actually meant was day trading in boxer shorts, while his girlfriend filmed aesthetic coffee videos for social media. Dad adored it. He's taking risks, he told me proudly over the phone one evening. He's ambitious. Translation, he's Derek. That alone had always been enough. Then Dad casually added, if Vermont becomes too much for you, we could always sell it. Interesting word. I'm keeping it, I replied. The silence on the line told me he hadn't expected resistance. 20 minutes later, Patricia texted me. Don't be stubborn, honey. Your father is trying to help. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I turned my phone face down and opened another spreadsheet. Some conversations deserve emotions. Others deserve documentation. And somewhere deep down, for the first time, I had the strange feeling that my mother had known this moment was coming long before any of us did. Margaret Chen lived outside Hanover, New Hampshire, in a white cottage surrounded by birch trees. The kind of place that felt intentionally quiet. I arrived on a grey Thursday afternoon carrying a notebook, a travel mug of cold coffee, and the uneasy feeling that my life was about to divide itself into before and after. Margaret opened the door before I knocked. She looked older than I remembered, silver hair pinned back neatly, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, but her eyes were still sharp, almost watchful. Like she had spent years waiting for this exact visit. You look like Laura, she said softly. Nobody ever said that to me. People said Derek looked like Dad. People said I looked serious. I followed her into the kitchen. Tea was already waiting on the table, so was a thick manila folder. My stomach tightened immediately. Margaret sat across from me and folded her hands. Audrey, she began carefully, what I'm about to tell you was supposed to happen years ago. But your mother made me promise I would wait until the timing mattered. I stared at her, then at the folder, then back at her again. The Vermont property, she said, was never your father's. The room went completely still. I honestly thought I misheard her. What? She bought it herself in 2004, Margaret continued, 6 months before her diagnosis. I blinked. No, I said automatically. Dad said your father believed many things, Margaret interrupted gently. Your mother was very careful about what she allowed him to believe. Then she opened the folder. Inside were copies of legal documents, property records, trust filings, bank transfers, every page neatly tabbed. Margaret slid the first document toward me, the deed, owner, Laura Appleton, purchase price, $62,000, paid in full, cash. She used money inherited from your grandmother Grace, Margaret explained. Separate funds, legally protected. Your father had no ownership claim. I couldn't speak. 20 years of assumptions started cracking apart inside my head all at once. Margaret turned another page. This, she said, is the irrevocable trust. My eyes moved across the paper slowly. Beneficiary, Audrey Appleton. Transfer date upon maturity, Audrey's 30th birthday. I looked up sharply. You mean the property became legally yours 2 years ago? My breath caught. The house, the land, everything. Mine, not gifted, not inherited through Dad, not borrowed. Mine. My mother had bought it for me before she died. And somehow she had known to protect it. From everyone. Does my father know? I asked quietly. Margaret gave a small, humorless smile. No, how is that possible? Because during the divorce settlement in 2006, your father signed a quitclaim deed relinquishing any rights to properties held under Laura's separate estate. She pulled out another document. There were dozens of papers involved. He signed where his attorney instructed him to sign. I stared at Dad's signature at the bottom of the page. Bold, confident, careless. The irony almost made me laugh. For 20 years, my father believed he had generously handed me a worthless farmhouse. In reality, he had unknowingly returned something that had never belonged to him in the first place. Then Margaret reached beneath the folder and removed a cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front, in my mother's handwriting. Everything inside me stopped. Margaret handled it carefully, like something fragile. She asked me to give this to you when you were ready, she said softly. I think you're ready now. I took the envelope with both hands. The paper felt old. Delicate, real. For a moment I couldn't open it. I just stared at my own name written by someone who had been gone for 20 years. You don't have to read it here, Margaret said kindly. I nodded once. Because if I opened it in that kitchen, I knew I would break apart. And I wasn't ready to do that in front of anyone, not even her. I drove back toward Boston in silence. The envelope sat on the passenger seat the entire way. Every red light made me glance at it again. By the time I reached my apartment, it felt less like paper and more like a living thing, but I still didn't open it. Not that night, not the next night either. I placed it on my nightstand beside the lamp where I could see it every morning, like a door I wasn't emotionally prepared to walk through yet. Meanwhile, Derek's entrepreneurial phase was beginning to collapse. It started quietly. A few missed HOA payments on the penthouse, a failed crypto investment. Then Chloe started posting less, which in retrospect should have been everyone's first warning sign. One night Derek called me unexpectedly. No greeting. No small talk. "Hey," he said, sounding irritated already. "You know anything about short-term rental taxes?" I nearly laughed. "Why?" "I'm thinking of renting out one of the penthouse rooms for extra cash." Extra cash. He was living rent-free in a multi-million-dollar apartment and somehow still drowning. "How much are you losing?" I asked. "Temporary setbacks," he snapped immediately, which meant a lot. 3 days later, Dad called me. "Audrey," he began carefully, "your brother's having a rough patch." There it was, the family anthem. Derek struggles, everyone mobilizes. "How much?" I asked. Dad sighed heavily. "Just until he gets back on his feet." "How much?" Another pause. 15,000. I actually closed my eyes. Dad was retired. 15,000 wasn't casual money anymore. "He'll pay me back." No, he wouldn't, we both knew it. But Dad needed to believe Derek was temporarily unlucky instead of fundamentally irresponsible. That fantasy had cost him most of his retirement already. "Can you help?" Dad asked quietly. "No." The word landed harder than I expected. Silence. Then disappointment flooded his voice instantly. "You can be very selfish sometimes, Audrey." Selfish. Interesting word to use on the daughter who had never asked him for anything. I looked toward the envelope on my nightstand, still unopened, still waiting. "I have to go," I said calmly. Then I hung up. That night I opened my laptop instead of the envelope, and I started building something, a real business plan. Not a fantasy, not a dream board, a structure, boutique retreat model, historic restoration branding, projected occupancy rates, farm-to-table dining concept, seasonal wellness packages, architectural tourism. By 3 a.m, I had 27 pages drafted, not because I was angry, because suddenly everything made sense. The house, the timing, my mother's secrecy. She hadn't left me charity, she had left me foundation. In March, I took a leave of absence from my architecture firm, packed my car with boots, blueprints, thermal gear, and every dollar of savings I had. Then I drove back to Vermont, this time for good. Nora met me there with a contractor crew and one look at the farmhouse before whistling low. "This," she said, staring at the sagging roofline, "is either going to become the best decision of your life." She stepped through the doorway and kicked lightly at a warped floorboard. "Or the most expensive nervous breakdown in New England." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Then we got to work. Day 1, we ripped out water-damaged drywall down to the studs. Day 3, we uncovered the original oak framework beneath decades of cheap renovations. Solid, hand-cut, still standing after more than a century. By the second week, I was covered in dust, sleeping 4 hours a night, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. And I had never felt more certain about anything in my life. Then one afternoon, while stripping wallpaper in the upstairs hallway, I found something hidden beneath the peeling layers. A pencil sketch, tiny, faded, a drawing of the house. And beneath it, in handwriting, I recognized instantly one word. Someday. My knees almost gave out. My mother had stood in that hallway. She had touched that wall. She had imagined this future before I was old enough to understand what she was building for me. I pressed my fingertips gently against the sketch. Then I whispered the only thing I could think to say. "I found it, Mom." Ray never replied to my letter, not directly. But 3 months later, in the middle of February, during the first heavy snowstorm of the season, a reservation came through the Limestone House website. 1 guest, 3 nights. Name, Ray Appleton. No message attached. I stared at the booking confirmation for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Nora. Her response came back immediately. "Do you want me to cancel it?" I thought about it, about every football game, every missed recital. Every time Derek failed upward while I was expected to survive quietly. Then I thought about my mother. Limestone holds up cathedrals. "No," I texted back. "Leave it." He arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a grey wool coat carrying a single overnight bag. No Patricia, no Derek, just him. The snow was falling lightly across the meadow, softening the edges of the stone walls and cedar fencing. The creek behind the property had half frozen over, water still moving beneath thin sheets of ice. Dad stood in the parking area looking up at Limestone House like he still could not believe it existed. I opened the front door myself. "Welcome to Limestone House," I said. For a second, something almost broke across his face. "Shame maybe, or grief. You really built all this," he said quietly. "Yes." Marcus took his coat. Julia checked him in like any other guest. No special treatment, no awkwardness, just professionalism. Room 6, the birch room. Dad looked surprised. You named the rooms, after things that survive winters. He nodded slowly like he understood that sentence meant more than it sounded like. That evening, he sat alone in the dining room while snow pressed softly against the windows. Guests talked quietly over candlelight and wine. The fireplace crackled. Sam's mural glowed warm amber in the low light. Marcus served him the maple-glazed trout special. Dad looked around the room carefully, not like an owner, like a visitor. Good, I thought, that mattered. The second night he found me in the library after dinner. I was reviewing renovation sketches for a new greenhouse expansion. You're still designing, he said. I always was. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Then finally, I failed you, no excuses attached. No, but no, you have to understand. Just the sentence. I closed the folder slowly. Yes, I said. He nodded once like he deserved that answer. I kept thinking Derek needed more help, he said. And somewhere along the way, helping him became easier than seeing you. I did not rescue him from the silence after that. People should sit inside truth for a minute when they finally say it out loud. He looked around the library, the restored beams, the shelves I built myself, the brass reading lamps. Your mother would have loved this place, he said. Something in my chest shifted then, not healed, not erased, just shifted. She already did, I answered. The next morning before checkout, Dad handed me an envelope. What's this? I sold my watch collection last month, he said. There's a check inside. It doesn't fix anything, I know that. I didn't open it immediately. After he left, I sat alone in the office and unfolded the paper. $43,000, exactly the amount he had drained helping Derek. Attached was a note in his uneven handwriting. You were right. I kept trying to save the child who refused to build anything, and ignored the one who built everything from nothing. I am sorry. Dad, I cried harder at that note than I had during the confrontation, because anger is easier to carry than grief, and sometimes the apology comes decades after the damage. Spring arrived slowly in Vermont. The lavender returned first. Then the wildflowers near the creek. Then the guests. One afternoon in April, while planting herbs in the garden, I noticed a car pull into the drive. Derek. He climbed out wearing a dealership windbreaker and jeans. He looked thinner. Older somehow, less polished, more real. I'm not here to ask for money, he said immediately. That's a refreshing start. He almost smiled, almost. He looked down at the gravel. I wanted to see it. So I walked him through Limestone House, the kitchen, the garden, the guest rooms, the meditation path beside the creek. He moved slowly through the building, touching walls occasionally like he was trying to understand how something he mocked became something people traveled across states to experience. At the end of the tour, we stood on the back terrace overlooking the mountains. You know what the worst part is, he said quietly. What? I really thought this place was worthless. I looked out toward the tree line. So did Dad. Derek laughed once, bitter and short. Yeah, for the first time in my life, there was no competition standing between us. Just consequence. I don't know how to be who everyone expected me to be anymore, he admitted. That's probably the first honest thing you've said in years. He nodded. Then, after a long silence, you really built all this yourself. I looked at the stone walls glowing gold in the evening light, at the gardens, the cedar beams, the windows reflecting mountains. No, I said softly. My mother did too. After he left, I walked down to the creek alone. The limestone marker stood near the water. For Laura Appleton, who saw cathedrals in limestone, I brushed snowmelt moss from the edge of the stone and smiled, because she had been right. People had looked at me and seen the quiet daughter. The practical one, the independent one, the one who did not need much, but foundations are quiet, until the whole house stands on them.